that are out here today that are concerned with these issues, that we'll be able to address these concerns and move forward to protect the internet and the web in the way that we see fit. So thank you very much. Our third speaker today is actually joining us from the Department of Anthropology, and we're thrilled that we'll be able to have him here, Dr. Thomas Malaby, whose research focuses on social, cultural, ethical issues related to gaming, virtual communities, and online worlds. And he's going to share some work with us today about responsibility and ethics in gaming environments. Join me in welcoming Thomas Malaby.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Michael. So I'm tempted to ask first, how many people out there are gamers who call themselves a gamer? Do we have any around? I know you're out there because you're in some of my classes. I teach a games and culture class, and one of the things I do in that class is I have the students keep gaming journals, which is really a wonderful thing. I didn't know how well it would work out. The students, over the course of every week, they write about the games that they play and the games that they notice around them. Anyway, I am an anthropologist and I do study games. I look at online virtual worlds, Second Life, which is not really a game, but which I've written a book about, and World of Warcraft I spend a fair amount of time in, and it's all research, I assure you, it's all research. And today I'm going to talk about games and online games, but first I want to share with you first that I've learned we don't have anything to worry about, it turns out. Gamers are standing by. Even if they're not here in the plaza right now, they're standing by. And I know this because there was a national ad, a national television ad last year from Farmers Insurance. This is a wonderful ad. Farmers Insurance had this ad that shows a quiet residential street in the evening in a suburb somewhere. And in it appears a villain, and all the classic kind of cliches of a villain, long black cloak, this kind of pale, maybe there were horns on his head, all the things you might imagine. And he starts blowing things up. He blows up a lamppost that falls over onto a car. He sets a house on fire. He starts doing all this stuff. And it's about then that if you're watching the commercial, you start to notice that on the screen are these little kind of displays in the corners. And then you start to see things happening, like someone is pushing buttons somewhere and reversing everything this guy is doing, defeating him. Keeps trying to blow up that car, and it keeps getting put back together. And then the screen cuts to two young guys, look like they're just out of college, sitting at two computer terminals, and they're playing the game where they are putting everything back and defeating this guy, and they're of course giving each other knucks and saying, level 5, way to go, things like that. This is for an insurance company. Insurance is an industry that hasn't really changed in about 300 years, but this insurance company is telling you in this primetime ad that working for them are gamers, and those gamers are running all their tech, and those gamers are going to fix everything for you. When you run into a lamppost with your car, it's a gamer who's there who's going to manage everything that has to be done to put everything back right. Now that is a major, major cultural shift that a company would say that. And you start to see it reflected elsewhere. They're interested in hiring gamers. They're interested in understanding how they can get gamers working for them. And this is an enormous shift because in the past, we thought of games as pretty much only one of two things. Either they're an utter waste, there's nothing at stake in them at all, or they're so powerful and so dangerous that there's something that you will get addicted to. Right? So that's basically all or nothing proposition. What I want to talk about today, and specifically talk about with respect to online games, is what is at stake in these games. Because it isn't all or nothing, but there is a fair amount at stake. And one thing that we have to keep in mind when we try and make sense of this is that these online games, the massively multiplayer online games as they're called, or virtual worlds they're called sometimes, places like World of Warcraft, EverQuest, places like that, the reason they accumulate stakes is because they're persistent. Those worlds are essentially the same tomorrow when you log into them, or next week, or 3 weeks from now, and the actions you take in them can last. You can build something maybe, and it's still there next week. So the persistence of these spaces is why all of the stuff I'm going to talk about can happen in online games. So what is at stake? Well, we already heard one thing that's at stake, apparently, competence. When you play games, you are acquiring some competencies to do something. Apparently, to learn how to work for an insurance company and run their computers, and that's actually not that wrong. There's a lot about the complexity of information technology and managing the information technology and its complexity that looks a lot like playing a video game, right? But it's not just that. There's been research by a wonderful group at Madison on the uses of virtual worlds, or rather how players of these games, players of World of Warcraft, actually learn how to engage in scientific reasoning. They do experiments in these virtual worlds to learn things that the company that runs the game won't tell them, and they work together, they collaborate, they take information down, they try different theories, they experiment, and then they come up with conclusions about how this very complex environment works. They learn how to work with others in this environment. They learn how to organize. They learn how to resolve disputes. They learn how to research things across the web, which is very relevant to what we're talking about today. They learn how to go and find the information they need and incorporate that information. Some of them learn how to program what are called add-ons, programs that work within these programs. So that's one kind of stake in these virtual worlds. It's these competencies that can be acquired within them. Now, that's not everything. Now, that's not one of the kind of ethical things. If you are a gamer and you're spending time in these places, one of the things you have to think about is, well, what am I getting out of this? What kind of competencies and other things is this giving to me? And what do I need to go elsewhere for? What do I need to take a course in SOIS or a course in anthropology to learn? Because they're not going to teach you everything. They also, and this is one of the things that I think is most interesting about online games, they can be a site where you can actually acquire some credentials. And the students here, why you're here, the ultimate reason why you're here is to get a credential. That's what a degree is. A college degree is a credential. It allows you to go out and do certain things. It's one of the things that's at stake for you on this campus. Well, interestingly enough, and this may just be the beginning of this, there are also credentials that you can acquire in these online games. You can acquire the credential of guild leader, for example. Now, that may not sound very relevant for a job, but it turns out that at this very moment, if you were to apply for a job with a major online game company, and they make millions and millions of dollars every year, and you were to apply for a job in community management, if you had on your resume guild leader, that would be very much a count in your favor to get that job. So it's that kind of thing that we're at the beginning of. But let me talk about a couple of other kinds of stakes before I quickly wrap up. Social stakes. Social capital. These are online games and they're persistent, but they're also social. There are other people involved in them. So when you set about to accomplish something in these games and you develop ties with other people, you develop obligations to them. And that actually can be a source of enormous difficulties. It can be a source of real ethical challenges, right? You've got people in these environments who are counting on you to do something so that together you can accomplish something perhaps quite difficult. And over time, those become just as real as the obligation to meet a friend for coffee, right? Or the obligation to go to a concert with a friend of yours, or the obligation to help someone study, or the obligation to any of a number of other things that surround you and in which you are entirely enmeshed in your day-to-day life. That calls for balance. It calls for a certain ethical reasoning about what you can and cannot manage, and how many of these commitments you can have in your day-to-day life. And then finally, there are material stakes. There are stakes as we normally understand them. If we were talking about gambling, for example, we have stakes in online games that are money, that are valuable objects that can be sold for money. That as well raises ethical issues. When you spend many hours in these persistent environments, leveling up in, say, World of Warcraft, some character to level 70, it turns out that character is probably worth several $100s on eBay or some other place like that. And the gold that you've acquired on that character is worth quite a bit of money. So what do you do, right? You have, maybe without sort of thinking about it ahead of time, or maybe you have thought about it ahead of time, you have acquired some stuff of value. This capital has accumulated in this space. Is it ethical to sell it? What is that? What are the implications of that for your relationships to the people that you have built in that game? When you leave the game, you just say, well, you know what, I'm saying goodbye to all these people and I'm just going to make $1,000 off this because I can. Those are complicated questions. For one thing, you'll be violating the terms of service, the EULA, the End User License Agreement, of the people who make the game. Not exactly like breaking the law, but it is violating a contract. Not like breaking a criminal law, I should say. So all of this is questions you should be asking yourselves as you set about to game. Those of you who are gamers need to be thinking about this just as much as those of you who are not gamers maybe ought to be thinking about it as a way to open your eyes about what games are and what people are doing in them. Thank you.